Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Earning Curve. The Earning Curve is a new platform in webinars, so we essentially let all of you, the audience members, drive the questions. So start thinking about your questions and type them into our chat, which is a thought bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. My name is Marianne Biangardi, and I am in charge of business development at Schmershel Treloar. We're an accounting firm in St. Louis, and I'm also the moderator for this wonderful platform called the Earning Curve. Today's topic is legal considerations for managing distribution, supply chain, and go-to-market. Our panelists will be answering all of your questions. Maybe some of you want to know more about leveraging your legal applications in order to bolster your go-to-market strategies. So just think of those questions and send them to us and we will get them answered. Let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. Welcome everyone. Thank you all to all of our panelists for joining us today. Marquita Barbieri, she's the principal at Carmody McDonald Law. She has a concentration in corporate law, tax, mergers and acquisitions, securities, real estate, and a variety of other industries. Her industry focus is manufacturing, life sciences, IT, marketing, and real estate. Marquita advises public and privately held companies on a wide range of transactions, distribution agreements, joint ventures, purchase and supply agreements, and more. Fun fact about Marquita, she was once working out at the same gym with George Clooney when he was in town filming a movie, and she didn't even realize it was him until her friend pointed him out. Welcome, Marquita. Next up, we have Aaron Pirlet, founding partner of St. Louis-based integrated communications firm Elasticity. Aaron is an author with 25 years of experience in journalism, public relations, and digital marketing. Throughout his career, Aaron has counseled a wide variety of organizations, from Fortune 500s to professional sports organizations, well-funded startups, and nonprofits. Fun fact, at one point in his life, Aaron was the world's leading facial hair advocate. Mark Baxa is a welcome, Aaron. And next up, we have Mark Baxa. Welcome, Mark. Mark Baxa is the founder and president of Fmea Creek. He's been on the panel before, so welcome back. As a founder, president, and CEO of Fmea Creek LLC, that's a global supply chain consulting group. Mark is a leading supply chain executive who helps companies that require global supply chain performance to gain a competitive advantage. Mark has served on as the chairman of the board for the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. He has also worked with Monsanto, Upjohn, and ELM. Mark has traveled and worked in over 40 countries as a supply chain professional and maintained friendships in all of them. He is crazy about fishing in the Great North. His home has a wide variety of pets, and he has also driven in several presidential motorcades during the Bush administration. Welcome, Mark, or welcome back. Thad Lubers is up next. Welcome, Thad. Thad is a manager of national accounts for the Ardau Group. Thad Lubers is a manager of national accounts and a global leader in metal and glass packaging solutions. He's been with Ardau for almost 8 years, focused on beer, food, and beverage glass packaging. In addition, his grandparents worked at Ardau production facility for more than 30 years in the glass bottle production. He and his wife, Nicole, have a son, Grayson, and another one on the way. Okay, so before we open it up to your chat questions, I actually want to get started with an opening question for Marquita, as she's the lead panelist today. And after she responds, I would like for the other panelists to also add their comments if they wish. So Marquita, why can't you just rely on trust anymore? Just shake hands and call it a deal. Why is it so important to know more about legal considerations?
Thank you for all having me today, first of all, and thanks, Marianne, for the great introduction. Why can't we just shake hands and all get along? Well, that's a simple answer. God bless America. We're in America, folks, and I don't think we were ever really able to shake hands. The issue with the shaking of hands is that one person remembers the deal one way and the other person remembers the deal the other way. Or after the handshake, things change along the way, which is really going to be the focus of today's conversation. Even if things worked or were the right way to do a supply chain or a distribution network or a route to market strategy moons ago or even yesterday, things change. And so you have to make sure that your agreements reflect the reality with your business partners, with your customers, and that you're really maximizing the behaviors of everyone involved in the process to reach their goals. Overall, though, again, God bless America, we're a bit of a litigious group. So if somebody doesn't agree, you better have it in writing.
Thank you, Marquita. Who else would like to chime in on that?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that a statement of work and scope of responsibilities and requirements in any agreement be thoroughly outlined, just as Marquita said in her statement, that the idea between parties comes together in a form of a set of obligations and commitments to one another, and understanding what those performance indicators are as a part of that agreement are really critical. So that scope of work is really important, and having it on paper where it can be benchmarked and reviewed on a continual basis is very, very important. I think too that, agreements outline also the risks and the avoidance of those risks between parties, and not necessarily from a lawsuit happening perspective or litigious standpoint, but really around how each other takes an effort to contractually agree how they're going to protect each other's interests, whether that be intellectual property or by default looking at security of responsive supply and what that contract really means to each party in terms of fulfilling those requirements. It's really important, I think, in building a foundation of trust and commitment and also obligations to each party.
Yeah, I think even more than ever with what we just went through, right? Having a contract with one of your suppliers, it was even more important as capacity and freight and everything kind of tied up, ensuring that you had something in place that guaranteed contractual supply, not only for the company who was supplying it, but also for the end user. Really benefited those people that did have contract, because there are a lot of companies out there that still work just on a standardized PO system, and they don't actually have contracts with their suppliers. And those, unfortunately, in the past recent months were probably shorted or hurting the most at this current moment.
And these are the great points that I wanted the business folks and those in the area that are not in legal necessarily to raise for the group, because oftentimes people think that the agreement is just for the benefit of legal counsel, that for some reason, legal has required to get this agreement in place, and people look at it, accomplish the goal for legal, and then it's tucked away in the cabinet to be forgotten about. What Mark and Thad are sharing with you is the importance of living with that agreement. And it's really the business people who have to live with that agreement long term and go back and look at it in times that are trying, but also times that are just trying to accomplish the goals of buying and selling and making money on a day-to-day basis. But it is events like COVID-19 that cause people to go back and look at that agreement and say, did we really think of all the scenarios on how to keep things going, even when things aren't going the way we thought they were supposed to go? So legal agreements are not for legal counsel. We are trying to write down and reflect the reality of the parties' relationship, manage risks and rewards, and also put metrics in place that allow the parties to measure the success of their relationship.
Thank you, Marquita. We have a question here in chat. How does an organization move beyond just identifying problems and non-performers in the supply chain? What are 3 ways or meaningful steps that we can take to address non-performance in the supply chain?
I'm happy to jump in and start, and then I know that Mark and Aaron and Thad have some thoughts on this too. I think that that's one of the main issues that I've bumped into. I started doing distribution and route to market restructuring fairly early on in my career. I was 29. I mean, heck, I'm still 29. But it was a bit ago. And we had to both restructure a North American distribution network and a European distribution network. And for many years before I started working on this project, the company had, fantastic consultants come in, some more effective than others, and a lot of data and analysis was done only to reveal what the internal team, the sales team, the marketing team, and the executive team already knew, that there were certain chinks in the chain that were not performing correctly. And the work that was done on the data side was really only to reveal and scale those performers. And the conclusion was, look, here's our 5, troublesome distributors, or our 5 weak links in our system. We already knew that. So how do we fix it? Where do we go from there? And that was consistently where the company got hung up. So when we were revisiting how to finally solve for the problems that we knew about, we sat down in a room, and the first key was really to find each of the cross-functional team leaders and put them in the room. We needed decision makers in the room. We didn't need C-suite executives in the room. They're supposed to be busy doing what they need to be doing to run the company at a different level and be aware of it. But the empowerment that was given to the director level and those immediately below the C-suite to go and solve this problem was key. And when we sat down to talk through the issues, we really used what I would say is empirical data. We really went around the room and said, what's your experience? What do you think about this distributor? What do you think about this process? How do you think we've been handling restocking issues? And all of those empirical, just real life stories were those that were burning everyone's mind and irritations for many, many years. So that activity of truly locking the right people in the room, I think there were about 7 or 8 functional leaders who truly had to participate to give us the insight at all levels. And from there, we said, how do we fix this? Where do we go from here? So appointing the right people in your organization to talk about these issues and just get down to the brass tacks of what are the issues. We don't need a ranking scale necessarily to tell us what we already know. We know it, and let's start solving for it. That's the first level that I would really recommend companies look at as they dive into how to solve the issue. Where does legal come in? That was the second issue. For the first time in years, the company was forced to read its distribution agreements and its supply agreements and its agreements with its customers. And it was pretty shocking because most of the leaders said, oh my gosh, we don't do this. We would have made money had we charged a restocking fee. We would have made money had we solved this. Oh, we would have stopped some customer behavior had we known that this was written in the document. So the second step was really reading those legal documents. I'll let the others chime in and then we'll circle back. Should pass it straight over to and Mark to weigh in.
I just jumped in real quick. There we go. So a moment of silence is good. Gets the audience looking at the screen, wondering if we're here. So I think the question is really very broad, but it also has a potential to go deep. And I like what Marquita said about the uncoupling and looking at the risks that the business is currently facing and how people feel about different parts of the supply chain to kind of get a heuristic notion. The next step, I think, would be to assess the organization's own capability and competency around not just to solve the problem, but to solve for future instances, because the best defense is a strong offense, anticipating where your business will be headed and how your supply chain needs to fulfill your business requirements. It sounds really easy to say, and it is. I mean, I could sit here all day long and talk about that. But what it really means is the people in the operations side of your business have a keen sense of what your business as a whole is trying to achieve, and then fulfilling that from an operations perspective. your planning, your sourcing or procurement, the manufacturing, logistics, customer service, and the supporting functions such as HR, legal, and others who all have a key stake in success have to be aligned around the common goal. And if you can't detect where the real problems are, one of the easiest, I think, and actually quite interesting and potentially fun exercises is using a Six Sigma tool called the Fmea Analysis, where you look at the frequency of the issue, the impact of the issue, and how often the issues occur. And just like Marquita said, all of the various elements of the distribution chain that may be a cause of the problem or perceived cause of the problem may not actually be the problem. It may be somewhere else. And getting there with some analysis, team analysis, together will help cite where the critical gaps or challenges are that are stopping or blocking your business from succeeding. In today's environment, one of the most important things businesses can do is not blame logistics on your inability to deliver. It's a very big, publicly, widely broadcasted and easily commented on part of our supply chain right now, because we seem to be in this bubble where capacity shift has swung in more of a bullwhip effect, that it's affecting all aspects of logistics, whether it be e-commerce, small parcel, truck, or ocean containers and rail, barge, it doesn't matter. We're in a current cycle right now that's a huge problem for most logistics professionals working at companies, for those serving those companies. But that's not necessarily the root of the challenge or the problem. The problem is trying to smooth out demand and being reliable in that demand forecast for the providers you work with. So I think that's today's top of mind issue. But let me just address one other thing, and Marquita, I'll turn it back to you, is that we have had over 4 years a significant challenge coming from two different fronts. One, geopolitical China, and secondly, followed by the human pandemic. So right now, your procurement team has the challenge of changing its pattern of behavior to look at more upline supply chain provisions to meet supply and demand. So while we've got the logistics folks trying to figure out how to smooth out all these bubbles and rocks that we have in our way to get delivery done today, the sourcing and procurement team should also be looking at longer views of their supply chain and contractually challenging suppliers to make commitments around a more collaborative approach to how their supply chain themselves is designed. So you can see that at the end, when you think you're sourcing from 3 different factories, the same part, that it all doesn't lead back to the same originating manufacturer in China, because that's what many companies stumbled on this time. And frankly, none of us really knew a lot of this, right? But now it's been an exposure issue. So I think we need to look at it from that aspect, as well as longer leads into the supply chain and a longer view of your supplier community as well. So as you look at your challenges, try to understand that root cause first, analyze it, get some numbers on the board, understand where the larger constraints are, and then start peeling back within both logistics and sourcing, and eventually getting to manufacturing. So you need to decouple these things to recouple them again in a new design. There's other ways to get at it, and I can comment later, but I think to get to this question, that might be the heart of it.
Yeah, I think looking at it legally in supply agreement situations, there's always been a push to have 100% of the business on a supply agreement side, right? Now, I think even more than ever with capacity constraints within the United States, or even freight logistics issues on cargo ships coming in from China, anyone can pull up a map right now. There are hundreds of cargo ships sitting out in the ocean waiting to get offloaded. And to get them offloaded, you're going to pay additional $3,000 to get them offloaded in a surcharge. So while you may be saving, you think you're saving money on the actual good, after all the surcharges, making it domestically may be just as effective. And you may now have a better opportunity more than ever to dual source, dual supply, and set yourself up in your company to be more flexible. If the pandemic has taught one thing, is that you definitely need flexibility. And I even think more companies within the United States have even looked at this differently and said, I'm okay now with 50% supply. I don't need 100% supply, because we want the flexibility as well to be able to pivot and adapt. and we may not necessarily agree with taking on a piece of business 100% at a certain return when we're willing to take 50% of that return, and we don't want to take all of it at that return. So just something to think about.
Thanks,
I agree
guys.
with that. I'm really glad you reached both sides of the conversation, both the supplier and the distributor side, especially on the single source piece. Great points, and certainly those that we see as a benefit happening for both sides, which before the pandemic might not have been the same analysis. You're right that suppliers have always wanted that 100% volume commitment from customers. However, this particular instance has showed that might not always be advantageous for either party. And certainly not for the companies. To single source supply can often result in competitive issues where your supplier suddenly becomes a competitor to you. So there's restrictions and covenants that should be included in agreements with your manufacturing sides and suppliers, if that's possible. But also from a reality of where an impact of an event such as the pandemic. I've worked through force majeure issues over my career many times, including the tsunami back in the day in Japan. So if you'll recall that one as well. A little more isolated to some extent from what was impacted industry-wise, but it has been every single industry impacted by COVID-19 in some way, shape, or form. So a new awareness across the board. Mary Ann, back to you.
Thank you. So we have another question here in chat. How does a company ensure its legal agreement support, and what is it doing in the marketplace, as well as what it is looking to accomplish tomorrow? In other words, how do you ensure your legal agreements are not outdated, inflexible, or contradictory to the objectives of the company? Marquita, do you want to start?
Really doing a great job. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, there's a delay. Mark was touching on this as well, and I think it's a really important point. And for those who have worked with me before, I do have a mantra of make your agreements reflect reality. For everyone who thinks that legal is, again, boring or the sort of thing that's in the way, I'm sorry for those experiences generally for the profession, but for those of us who truly, care about your business and want to learn about your business, I encourage all of the groups that are involved in creating the agreement to teach your lawyers your business. As Mark was going through the list of concerns and realities of the experiences of the people in the business working through the issues, I can't tell you how many times in our meetings my colleagues would say, to Mark's point, this happens all the time. We always see this issue. Gosh, we see this all the time. In order to fix how your agreements are functioning and to fix those issues, you have to convey those to your legal counsel so that they can change the agreement. By the time we were finished with the probably 6 to 8 week concentrated meetings going through a Six Sigma program and the details that Mark outlined for you amongst all the groups, we did completely blow up the previous distribution agreement. We reassessed whose responsibilities were in the appropriate place. We addressed concerns that touched on the sales team's commissions and how they were paid, how the process worked, how our distributors could interact with each other. And we completely rewrote the agreement to reflect each of the scenarios that the team identified as long-lasting, futuristic-looking, and also ways to continue to be nimble if there were changes along the way. So teaching each other back and forth in a meaningful way about the business needs and the goals, and how your marketing team is interacting and how your sales team are interacting with your customers completely down the supply chain to your end users are key to tell your legal counsel so that they actually draft a document that's specific to your business and to each situation. Much to everyone's surprise, all the agreements are not identical. Even if you threw them all on the floor, they might have similar titles, but the words inside those documents are specific to how you should be writing.
I'll just quickly add one thing, and I would say also have your individuals who are working on the agreements understand each individual supplier, right? Because demand and supply right now is also going to affect pricing structures at the end of the day. So is it an advantage for you to sign a long-term agreement today with what's called a paper supplier that is maxed out, full of capacity, and they know that now is their time for getting their margins up, essentially? Or is it a better opportunity to say, hey, you know what, we're just going to sign a 1-year supply agreement and we're going to reassess it in the following year and wait for the market to level back out? So that would be something I would also really focus on is making sure that the procurement and the legal team understand, okay, let's look at our entire supply chain. You know, where do we know that there are capacity constraints and issues, and how is that possibly affecting overall pricing? Because last thing you want to do is lock yourself into something extremely long-term that is not an advantageous price year over year over year, when you could requote it, rebid it, and improve your guys's end price into the market. So
thank you, Thad. And that really also is a reason why many people have forgotten about or haven't looked at agreements for a long time. They were evergreen. Again, probably to get rid of legal somewhere in there. Oh, we got it done. Let's push it over here and never look at it again. Again, that's not doing the business any good service. You don't have to interact with legal for a little bit, but then you have to work with them more because now the document is so outdated, or the terms and pricing are really not beneficial. So these evergreen or long-term agreements, while at one point in time may have been regarded to be the right decision, and perhaps there are situations where that's still appropriate, we are seeing a shift, and we really have been for the past several years, to shorter term agreements, truly no longer than 2 or 3 years. The world changes, things change, and as Thad says, even impacts to pricing and how you can negotiate that and update things to see if how the parties' interactions during the course of the initial term of the agreement, do they really work that way the same way in a few years? So the shorter term agreements are recommended. It also forces the parties to go back and look at those, read those, and say, are we still doing business the same way that we wrote it down a year ago? What worked, what didn't work, what do we need to change? And that's been a key part of both the supply agreement side, but also the end user customer side, because we would then develop volume-based pricing agreements that would help conversations be more than pricing. Shifting just a little bit, one of the challenges that some of my businesses have had over the years is that after a pandemic or in various crises, everything just becomes a battle of the price. And that wasn't very fun for our salespeople after a while. They're like, oh, well, I'm not really selling anything. I'm just out there saying we can do 5 cents less than this person, and we're only debating about price, but we're not actually selling apples and apples, and the customers aren't seeing that our product actually has a benefit for a higher price. These opportunities allow the business to work with legal to develop, even on an iPad, a customer interface that says, here's what the value of our products are, here's the benefits that we have, so that you can compare not just price against the competitor product, but also the value-based incentives and the value-based goals that our product manufacturing or our products have and bring to the customer. With those, you can start a conversation that really locks in that customer also for a period of time, and together your supply arrangements and your pricing should match up with how you can enter into some volume-based pricing and some at least year-long agreements with your customers, and give them some security as well.
I think effective agreements really value and create a lot of meaning for value if they're done right, but also they protect the freedom to operate of your company. And let me explain what I mean by that. So many supply chains today, to your point, Marquita, have long lead times, and there are various suppliers or business partners in the mix that are a part of that supply chain. And when it comes to agreements becoming dated or ineffective, we should be out of that mix now. We really should not be in that kind of a place. And I appreciate the fact and learn to appreciate, and I think everyone should appreciate the value an attorney can bring to drive the value for an organization, but as well as protect the risk of liability and loss. So if you think about creating value first and foremost and delivering value to the business while protecting and preserving your freedom to operate, now you've got the momentum you'd like to have in that conversation. So let me just share one other point. With these long lead times and long supply chains come inherent risk. Things around your business partners that need to be, if you will, defined in your agreement so they don't encumber liability on your company. They're accountable for making sure that certain criteria around human rights and who they're sourcing from to make the things you buy internationally do not have impacts from human rights violations. It's forbidden in the United States. The other thing is that prior to President Biden taking office, President Trump instituted new changes in certain parts of the world, including North Korea. Now supply chains anywhere outside of the United States are forbidden to have bonded or slave labor, if you will, from North Korea. Do you know that North Korean nationals are not in your supply chain? Have you found a way to value that? Have you put that as a part of your agreement? What about anti-corruption and the FCPA and behaviors around import and export controls? So inherently, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that agreements stay current, but also they have the right language to protect the interests of your company and those of your business partners at the same time, so you can create real value. So there's much more to say than, okay, we got to define agreement, set the legal process aside. It's really about creating a collaborative working relationship so that you do create value continually, but also protect your freedom to operate worldwide.
I'm going to slip Mark $50 after this presentation. Thank you, Mark. That's exactly right. And I think that, because as lawyers and in Mark's role and in Aaron's role and in Chad's role, we see so many business issues in many industries. So there are benefits that you receive by having that conversation and having the issues on export controls, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, all the things that Mark rattled off. Those are things that we deal with every day in many industries. So kind of going it alone without knowing those might trip a wire. So take advantage of the experts in your industry to learn about those and make sure that you've accounted for them and see what's relevant in your industry. And another protection there that I wanted to mention after Mark's point is going off of an agreement and making an exception for a customer. Sometimes those are done very, very quickly in order to keep a customer relationship. And again, surprisingly, that's a moment to check in with legal and confirm that you're actually making that exception correctly and that you're not changing the agreement and the course of dealing between the parties for that special customer. We recognize that, we want to maintain those relationships. They take an awful lot to build from a marketing and customer relationship interfacing process. And one of the tips that we worked on with our marketing team, Aaron, I'll have you jump in here, is that sending a letter to the customer to say, hey, we're making an exception for you because we value our customer relationship. No problem this time, but we're just making a waiver for whatever might be in our agreement in this particular instance because we value our relationship. So communications like that actually become valuable to both remind the customer of a favor or an exception that might be granted, but it also lets you maintain and protect the company going forward on not letting that slippery slope happen where a goal to make the customer happy or to make the sales team happy doesn't go too far and suddenly take away the value of all the procedures and processes the company has put into place.
Yeah, I agree, Marquita, because whenever we've had challenges with any of our clients, it's always begun with poor communication and not having a transparent discussion back and forth when there's been issues about as they relate to our contract. And we see it all the time because some people just inherently don't like to have difficult conversations and they struggle with them. And so the more documentation that you can have when you do make exceptions to your rules or exceptions to your statements of work in our case, it's typically really essential that you do that. Otherwise, there is a slippery slope and you find yourself being taken advantage of, and also the ability for sometimes people will just work to get out of their contracts that they've, that you've worked very hard to secure. So for us, it's always beginning with transparent communication. Even when you have bad news to share, I'd rather a client just tell me what's happening as opposed to trying to slide out of something, but and then make sure you're documenting everything.
Thank you, guys. We have another question here. How can you use legal agreements to motivate expansion in the business, to safeguard revenue opportunity, and directly champion sales and marketing? Aaron, do you want to start with that?
I don't know. I don't know if I'm the right person for that.
Okay, Marquita, go ahead, and then we'll see if Aaron can wait.
If there's a beard question, I'm in.
There's a part for him in there.
Okay.
I think that's a great question, and one that I think summarizes a lot of the points that have been made thus far, both by Mark and Thad and Aaron in his last response there. Not the beard one, the one before that. But the goal generally is to create those agreements to reflect reality. Growth should be a part of the conversation with legal. And Mark has mentioned this too, what's the forward-looking plan that's not just today, but a little bit further out. Sometimes, and again, I think today we can't even look 5 years out. I think looking out 1 or 2 or 3 years might be as far as the mind can go, just how fast the world is moving, which is good. It keeps you on your toes. But the reality is to try to put in end user customer agreements, volume-based incentives, protection of intellectual property, which Mark did touch upon. I worked for a company that would, and this might be an interesting point for Thad to weigh in on as well. There are requests from customers, and the request from the, I accidentally hit the mute button. The request for the company to perform for a customer is great. You have a special request. But what intellectual property are you giving away as the company that you are unwittingly giving that value without first securing the purchase by the customer at the end? So a lot of companies that work in a formula-based business where we're going to develop something for you and then you buy our ingredient or you buy our piece of the formula that goes into what we've created for you. Are you giving away information and yet you are not securing the corresponding purchase by the customer to lock in for that formula? So those types of educations of how the company process and what it delivers to the customer and what the customers are asking the company to do are a really valuable education point, especially for your legal counsel, to say, here's how our business works. The way we get business is if we do X. We've got our marketing team out there saying, we have people who can create a formula. We have people who can do these things. Now those customers have been brought to us. We want to kind of give first, give a little to make a little, but don't forget the make a little part, because before you give and before you let loose, the extra work that you did to bring in that customer, be sure that you're making a contract with that customer to secure the supply and the purchase from your company before the intellectual property is out the door, and they can just substitute in another company to provide the service or to provide the supply. Mark and Thad and Aaron, I'll let you guys jump in to tack on those points.
Yeah, I think, what people need to understand is the initial supply agreement you get from a supplier is going to be pretty 100% cookie cutter, right? It's going to be everything that the supplier hopes that you agree to, and that there is no back and forth. But through negotiation and volume-based incentives, there's a lot of room for creativity, let's say, right? To where, hey, if you meet this specific target or this specific goal, then we as a supplier may kick back X% that you have to spend on marketing, or you have to spend on sales promotions, or whatever the case may be, right? And so that allows you to not only grow, but then as you grow, take those quote, call them rebates, bring them back into the business, and then sell them to promote your business, but also promote the supplier's part of the makeup, let's say, whatever it may be, right? And so I'm sure Aaron probably has some, some feedback on that, but that's something to think about, is that just because this is what the agreement says doesn't mean that there's a lot of flexibility there as you guys go back and forth, especially when you talk about revenue or volume increasing, because many manufacturers are budgeting for 2022. My company starts in 45 days, right? And so we're looking at long range planning that we're trying to figure out. And so keep that in mind, is that if we think those volumes are going to be there, that's an important thing for suppliers and manufacturers to be able to know that type of thing. So Aaron, I mean, what would your thoughts be if there was money that you knew that was coming back in to help for marketing and promoting?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it so in such a coarse manner, but we're in business to to make money, and we often find that we get people trying to take advantage of us, and I think that from a consultative standpoint, it's unfortunately it's rather common in that we've had, especially the larger companies, feel like they can take advantage of your workforce and your ability to perform, and you find that you almost have to manage expectations in to a degree in not turning around work products so quickly, because then all of a sudden, to get back to Marquita's term before, the slippery slope, it becomes extremely slippery, in that the work volume far exceeds the statement of work, and you find yourself working hours upon hours, that going beyond the contractual obligations. And of course, as a service company, you always want to exceed those expectations, but there's also limits. There's limitations to what you can realistically provide, or in the end, what ultimately happens is, if you go beyond those expectations, then your work product starts to suffer, and then you're not able to maintain that level of quality that you or the rest of your customers, or that customer you're serving, have come to expect. So managing that workflow and ensuring that you're abiding by the contractual obligations at least within a certain window. I mean, we always have expectations that we're going to exceed our work product by a certain percentage of hours. I'm fine if we're in, say, 15 to 20%. But when it starts to get to be like 50 and 60 and 75%, then I know things are going to come off the rails very quickly.
Thank you, Aaron. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Just a little additional insight. Thank you. If I could, just for a moment. So again, great comments. And I just want to add, in an agreement, particularly in a business that's looking to define how legal supports its top line growth and enables the sales function, which is the front line, to generate the revenue, right? It's about what is the initial offering, and how far are you prepared to go before you even enter into these agreements. That way you have an idea of what your exception window might look like, and you know exactly where the bridge points are that you have to cross if you decide to go even further than you agreed to on the initial approach. There has to be some latitude and some give and take, when the agreement is established, so that both companies, the selling and the buying parties, see value in that purchase or in that working relationship. And a well-defined scope or delivery that's outlined in these agreements helps substantiate the value the buyer is going to receive and the value you'll receive as the seller as a result of that. One thing I want to enter into the thought process is that if there's value for both parties, much as we like to buy at the lowest cost and sell at the highest price, that's back to Aaron's point, we're here to make money. You've got to generate and make meaning and make value occur for both parties. And if the time isn't relevant, okay, I'm remiss, but I don't want to leave this out. Stephen Covey wrote in his last book, The Third Alternative, a pretty masterful work. And that's about the art of delivering value for both parties that neither party saw coming before they put themselves together. So how do you generate something neither party can do on their own, but together you can do something incrementally more? I think it's a good read for many business leaders. It's not a real exciting read, but it's a great read to get to the bottom line of how to create meaning and drive value. And you can think about it in terms of your agreements. So at the end of the day, the response is, if you're not generating value for both parties, you've not achieved the most optimal agreement. And once you do, you must be sure that the service level agreement is established. What are the expectations? What are you going to deliver? What am I going to receive? That's the scope of work that's involved in the party agreement. So just want to throw those concepts out.
Yeah, and a sincere conversation about those is key. I think that sometimes, and I think one of the detriments to legal is that there are often knee-jerk negotiations that, oh, everything has to be mutual. Oh, everything has to look like this. Oh, you want that, I want that too. That's actually not the balance of a negotiation. As Mark says, that there is something of value that this party has and something of value that this party has, and both parties need to be able to articulate their roles and the risks that might be different for each of them. And sometimes legal can get in the way. You never know how those negotiations are going to go, but you hope that you can have a conversation that says, listen, we're willing to do a lot of things mutually, but truly in this case, we're the manufacturer. We're the starting point for the product. We are the ones who can actually create the toy. Therefore, we have different risk, and you don't get to tell us what to do about it, supply chain folks. And here's what we have to deliver to our customer. And here's how we don't lose our connection with our end user customer by putting in a distribution network or a route to market that includes third parties that aren't the manufacturer. So one of the things that I'd like to tag on from Mark's comments is that, yeah, it has to be good for both parties. My Nana always said that as well, one of the best negotiators I'll ever know. And in doing so, that doesn't mean that everyone's just perfectly equal and the agreement is this kind of knee-jerk lawyer insert of a word here and there. It has to be an intelligent and thoughtful understanding of the business on each side, and each party should be able to articulate its value and its risks and how the relationship should work, because each party has a part to play.
Yeah, I'll just throw in one final comment and then I'll turn it back over. But once the agreement is completed and the transactions start, right, I would really step back as the customer and say, is this a transactional relationship or is this a true partnership? You want to have a partnership. The partnership is going to last much longer and also help you succeed as a company. So as you evaluate current suppliers, you need to really think about that. Is this transactional or is this a partnership? And that's what we strive to do, is to be a partner, not just a transactional relationship.
Thank you, guys. This is great. I love this. Back a lot of good conversation. We've got another one here. What are some of the most dangerous legal quagmires a company can stumble into from a distribution standpoint?
Whenever they put the word legal in there, it comes to me, it's completely unfair. I think that that some legal quagmires are truly, you know, again, I'll use that phrase again, that knee jerk, you know, oh, we must have this in here, even though it doesn't make any sense. And again, building on Mark and Thad's comments, you know, if you are in a conversation with a trustworthy and good partner, all agreements are negotiable. Now, leverage might be the issue. Who has more leverage in the situation? But to the extent that you control a key part of the relationship, each party should have some ability to have some leverage. So I think that agreements that would contain a, you know, unnaturally one-sided or unrealistic provision end up causing trouble for both parties, and establish a, you know, David and Goliath type of relationship instead of one that says we recognize the value of each party and we're going to work through it. So just signing whatever document is put in front of you because you might be the smaller company and you might not have the leverage might end up biting you in the tail at some point as you grow, because as the manufacturer, if you're the manufacturer, you can say, listen, I respect that you're bigger and badder and more awesome than us right now, but this is actually how we do our business. And you have to have the strength to say, we know how we do our business better than you do. You want to buy from us, even though you're the big bad wolf. We can't completely alter how we conduct business because you will be automatically in breach of the agreement the second you sign it. So signing something just for the sake of signing it, for a lack of leverage or a lack of confidence in your own offering, usually results in a not great situation and a tough one to get out of. I'll also throw out there for the land of the pandemic. Now everyone says, oh, I need a force majeure provision. I need a force majeure provision. Technically, this is your legal nugget for the day, and then I'll give you my top 5 to close this out after everybody else gives theirs. You know, force majeure provisions can be beneficial if they're fully thought out. But simply having a provision that says this agreement can terminate if something bad happens that we didn't think about, i.e. a pandemic, doesn't actually give a solution for either of the parties as to what that means. And then you might have a situation where someone's left holding the bag, revenue's gone, and everybody is just grateful that they had an out based on the pandemic. Obviously, that doesn't help anybody, really. Where's the solution in there? So a well thought out and played out industry specific force majeure provision can be helpful. Without one, though, you're not out of luck. So there's common law that applies, and it has applied throughout the pandemic. Even if your agreement doesn't have that language in there, common law already creates it for the doctrines of impossibility and the doctrine of impracticability, that if it's simply impossible to perform based on government orders, there is protection for you, and the parties should be able to work that out. So one red herring for the future as people come out of the pandemic, it doesn't mean that your agreement has to have a force majeure provision. If you're gonna do it, put in a good one that's really thoughtful and will show the map out of how you're going to allocate product or supply and how you're going to handle it. Don't just throw one in there for giggles because COVID happened.
Great. So I'll jump in with a little bit different dimension around risks and understanding the risks in your business, and going back to the supply chain that may have long lead times and a long transit time. If you are a business based in the United States and you are a net importer of goods from anywhere in the world, you are encumbered by, and I say encumbered because you are, by understanding the requirements and the regulations of which you can operate and should operate here in the US. They're vast, they're very complex, and often misunderstood or not even understood at all. And the idea that, well, I'm a smaller business, they don't really apply to me. It's the big corporations and the public companies that need to worry about it because they have the exposure. That's the wrong attitude, because the day of information technology is here, and US Customs, who imparts the administration of all agencies' regulations, not just the entry and the duties and taxes, but agricultural and other administrations, they are responsible for monitoring it, and they've got great IT systems. And the third parties that you hire to do these services for you, such as brokers, they report in those systems or the automated broker interface. So the information's there in your company, whether you know it or not. They already know a lot about you, that being the government. Now, they're not using it and shouldn't be using it as a weapon against you, but they have a right to audit and they have a right to question. And if you're not prepared, you often have to acquire the services of Marquita. And that's a bad thing, but you don't want to be behind the 8 ball where she's spending 3 months getting you ready and writing requests for delay to customs. Don't audit us yet. We got work to do. And she comes up and says, uh-oh, we got a massive disclosure issue here. And now you may lose your business because you can't afford to pay the fine. So the best defense is a strong offense. Know what you need to know. If you're an exporter going out of the United States, it's a double down impact. So you're not likely to get publicized if you violate something and admit to it on the import side. But as a company who exports, you're going to be in the news just like that because the law allows the US government to report you publicly. So you have to be very, very careful, and you have to know from the sales side who you're doing business with, and should you. It's great to get that big order worth a lot of revenue. But if you're selling to a party that's eventually going to be diverted to someone in Pakistan or some other prohibited part of the world that prohibits your goods or your technology from actually going there, you are accountable. Another thing about these too, especially your long lead time logistics agreements, freight forwarders, NVOs, if you will, you have to encumber them with, and again, Marquita's not paid me. I'm just telling you, the value of attorneys in the international space is almost priceless. So if you don't encumber your business partners with the risk and ownership of liability for doing improper things, you've left your company exposed. Here's what I mean by that. When a company like a broker in the US or a forwarder in the US or a foreign destination, if you will, pays a bribe to a government official without you knowing, but it's on your behalf, you're ultimately accountable for that action. The broker and the forwarder will be in trouble for sure, but you ultimately will pay the price. You'll pay the price in fines, potentially debarment, etc. So this black cloud sounds a little scary, but an ounce of prevention, a big heavy ounce, is worth pounds of cure. So it gets back to what you need to know in order to serve the markets you serve, particularly internationally. And your best defense is a real strong offense. Work on it ahead of time so that you don't fall into these traps. Rules and regulations change all the time. And if you're left exposed at the end of the day, you've introduced unnecessary and potentially seriously harmful risk to you and your business, both civil and criminal. So be very careful, know what you need to know, make sure you got the right people helping you along the way, and you will be very successful in beating out your competition. One other thing, I don't think there's any interest today in the administration of now in eliminating the painful, costly tariffs under the Trump administration when dealing with China. We got a lot to sort out, and I'm sure I'm not the president, okay? But there's a lot that's been exposed since he's been in office, and that is what risk countries like China pose from other areas of discipline, such as security. So these things may get unfolded, they may not. All I'm saying is that be very astute, work with your sourcing team, and look for alternatives so that you can develop a reliable supply, a quality supply over time, if in fact you can't afford the cost of goods coming out of China with the incremental tariffs. So there's ways to manage that, and there are people that are there to help you if you need help figuring it out.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and kind of add to what Mark said is, I think one thing that everyone needs to understand is on the legal side is, when does title pass to you of such goods or that you're purchasing from the manufacturer? When do you officially own those goods? Because everyone is going to write those differently within a supply agreement, and they may even be different written in general terms and conditions. So that's one thing, is when understanding when title passes to you. Number two is, depending on your actual product, what are the steps you need to take if there is a consumer related issue? Do you know through all of your suppliers what you need to account for and what you need to supply them if there is anything of that nature that would pop up? So, and going back to the general terms and conditions, while you may not be under a contract, you are signing some type of terms and conditions. Has your legal team looked at those? Because you may be overly exposed on a general terms and conditions you're not even aware of, because you're just signing it to get the goods and move on, and it may cause some issue down the road. So those are just 3 things that I would really focus in on.
Thank you, guys. It looks like we're really close on time here. We might go a couple minutes over, so I understand any audience member that has to drop off. Does anybody have any closing thoughts, any of the panelists? Would you guys like to, Marquita, do you want to say something and we'll go through the line? Just like a 1-minute wrap up and closing thoughts.
Even less than that, I'll give you my top 5. I often run the top 5 list on various things. So thanks all for your time today and for doing this panel. It's been great. Just remember, all agreements are negotiable. All contracts are negotiable, number 1. Even if it seems like they're not, it's a leverage issue. Try to learn about your partner, as Thad said, see who you're really dealing with. Number 2, even if we document it all down and we ink it and we sign it, it can be amended. So if things change, as Aaron said, don't be afraid to communicate. Don't let things not match up with reality. Get an amendment, which leads into my number 3. Make your agreements reflect reality. Make sure they match how you're doing your business. Good business means good law means good business. It should match up. Honor and enforce your agreements and your boundaries, like Aaron said. Don't let it be a slippery slope. Again, that communication piece is key. And as Mark said, it's got to be good for both parties or you'll never have a deal. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to give a quick wrap up?
Just to say it's been a pleasure to be a part of the webinar today, and anything I can do to help anybody afterwards, please feel free to reach out. And thanks again to the Earning Curve for this opportunity. I think it's been a great panel.
Thank you. Dad, do you want to say anything?
No, it was a pleasure. Phenomenally great to meet all of you. And if anyone is looking for any assistance that I can maybe supply, feel free to reach out. You know, last thing I would say is any materials you need, I would say always have those rebid, get multiple bids to make sure you're getting the best price that's out there. You'd be shocked how many companies are doing business with the same manufacturer they've done business with for 20 years and they just don't ever get it rebid and they're way out of whack, and there's an easy way to save pennies right there. So
thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, I would just reiterate some of the things that I heard some of my fellow panelists say, but more than anything, you are not a vendor, you're a consultant, you're a partner. And that mindset of being a vendor, both with your client and if you go in with that, is a recipe for just absolute disaster. And you know, sometimes when my clients have called me a vendor, I've very quickly reminded them that I am not. Sometimes that's not worked out so well for me, but you know, I'd rather not have a relationship that's positioned in that way anyhow. So I always try to keep that in mind, and I hope you do too.
Thank you, Aaron. We hope you've all found value today in the panel. We look forward to your feedback. Thank you to all of our sponsors, Enterprise Bank, Commercial Trelore, Spoke Marketing, St. Louis Makes, and Carmody McDonald. And I hope, I think we're going to put up the screen. Yep, there we go. Perfect. And here's all of our contact info. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. All the emails are up here, and we will be sending out an email thank you with all of this information in there as well. So reach out, find us on LinkedIn, connect, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks for taking a purpose-driven approach to profitability and employee retention. So we will see you all next time on March 16th. Thank you all. Have a good day.